Hello everybody, I am Zenith, and welcome back to the Disney Debate, where Cat Mac, Y2Staller and I discuss Disney films and other Disney products. Normally, however, today is a little bit different because we are on our third episode of Elseworlds Month. Credit to the Elseworlds Month. The name belongs to Eli Stone because, as the cartoon hero does every single year, he goes through a month of different videos where he reviews things in different reviewer styles, and it's very interesting, and I wanted to do something like that. But today is the reason why I started the Elseworlds month on the Disney Debate, because we're talking about Huntsman Winter's War. When I saw the trailer for this film, I had the idea to start it on the Disney Debate. And I'm just like, I was expecting something rather different. I was honestly expecting this to be a film that I would not like, especially because Snow White and the Huntsman, the original film, was not very good. Like, it was better than Mirror Mirror, I'll give it that, but it was not the best film. But after seeing Huntsman Winter's War, I'm like, I love this film, like, legitimately, unabashedly, like, no joke, I love this film. And I will give it the caveat that it's not a fantastic film. I wouldn't call it great, but honestly, I've seen it twice now, and I want to see it again. I actually want to put this in my movie collection and possibly touch upon this on Zen Movies in the future, but, like, I really like this film, and we're gonna get into why in a bit, but yeah, before that, first of all, Miss Kat McBerry, how are you doing?
Well, it's been a rough couple weeks for me, but, I'm back. I'm ready to record and everything, and I'm just really glad we're talking about a movie that doesn't suck for once. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't love this film as much as you do, but it is leagues better than what we've been watching so far.
I can agree with that. Master E-Rock, Rock Tia Drop, the man with the plan, Stan, my man. How's it going, Eric?
It's going pretty good. This is definitely one of those cases where the sequel, and I mean like the second in a series, not necessarily the other stuff, but where the sequel is definitely better than the original. It doesn't really happen too often in cinema, mostly speaking, but the only movie I could also think of recently that kind of does this too is Hotel Transylvania 2, because I saw the first Hotel Transylvania, thought it was okay, but then I saw the sequel. I'm like, wow, this was way better. Same thing here with Huntsman Winter's War. This was definitely a much better film. I mean, yeah, it still has its problems, mostly because of the stuff that had to associate with the previous one, but the one good thing about this is at least it doesn't have Kristen Stewart in it.
That's for damn sure.
That's for damn sure. But it's weird because if you look at how the first film was viewed, it was the Snow White and the Huntsman was critically reviewed very highly. It was praised for a lot of different things, and while there was good things in the film, like, I didn't think it was as good as everyone made it out to be. Like, I looked at the critics' review scores, like, people are giving it like 3.5 out of 4 stars and stuff like this, and I'm like, it doesn't really deserve that. But the thing is, Huntsman Winter's War is way better, but it was not really critically well received, which is so weird. Not to mention the fact that Huntsman Winter's War actually has a video game tie-in on Steam. It is a visual novel, and the first episode is free to play. It actually has mostly positive reviews from what I've seen on Steam, and that is so weird. I'm trying to react to this because I was watching the film and tweeting about it today, and one of my fans, Jim Bevins, he said, "Oh, are you going to review the tie-in game?" And I'm like, "Wait, the tie-in game?" And yeah, there is one on Steam, so maybe in the future. I've talked to Kat and Eric about it, and we all agree that it's probably best that we actually go back to Disney movies soon. But maybe in the future, I'm not sure. I'm gonna check out the game myself just to see if I like it as much as the movie. But it don't you think it's kind of weird that like the film that I really love and I think is leagues better did not do as well critically as the one that as the previous one that we thought was just okay. And then it got a video game tie-in for the sequel for some reason. It's just, this is an odd twist of events, and I'm not quite sure how to react to that. Kat, what is your reaction to this?
I'm a bit baffled myself, to be honest, because I mean, like I said, I didn't expect the film to be the way it was. I thought that, based on what I heard on the first film, that this one was going to be a complete shit show, especially given how it came about. But yeah, like the fact that it turned out better, yet was less well received, and yet got more promotion and exposure, I don't understand it. It's mind-boggling. I don't get it. Like, you showed me the link to that game, and I'm like, wait, so they made like a Warcraft style thing based on this? That's a lot of effort for a film that was received negative reviews. What the hell's going on?
in like the artwork for the game is actually like professionally done, and it's like a card-based battle system, and like I don't know too much about it, but I'm like, they put so much effort into this. Eric, what do you think?
I'm just surprised at the fact that movie tie-in games still exist, because the only thing about movie tie-in games is that now with the advent of mobile gaming and games you can play on your phones and tablets and stuff like that, and also downloadable stuff on Steam and other platforms, is that they just kind of shoehorn it in. They kind of shoehorn it in nowadays, because they just release it on digital just because it's easier to distribute, because instead of giving them like physical copies like any other video game that has come out, they just do it digitally because it's easier to produce, and they know they're probably not going to make their money back. It's just a cheap little thing. But there have been a few games that have been released, movie tie-in games that have been released on digital, that have actually been pretty good. So this is probably one of those things. So I remember years ago there was a guy who recommended me this the video game version of Real Steel. It was a movie years ago about boxing robots with Hugh Jackman, and I played the tie-in game, and the tie-in game was actually pretty decent. I mean, it didn't have too much to it, but it was actually a pretty decent fighting game. So sometimes little surprises like that happen. So I mean, I can't say too much about Huntsman Winter's War, the video game version, but from what you're saying, it sounds like it's a good thing.
Yeah, I'll have to check out the game and see, and maybe we'll do something about it in the future. We'll see what happens. Thankfully, the first episode is free regardless. Anyway, enough about the video game, because this show is about Disney's and debating the Disneys. So,
even though we're not doing that right now.
Shh.
Quiet you.
Stop using your logic. This is Disney related in some way, shape, or form, I guess.
Sure it is.
Shh. Anyway, before we get off topic too much, Kat, why don't you give us a brief summary of this film, what it's about, and then we can start talking about Chris Hemsworth and how handsome he is.
Oh, of course. So, yeah, this whole movie is a direct result of the director shagging up with his lead woman. Yeah, I'm not kidding about that. You've probably all heard about this before, but the big reason why Kristen Stewart did not return, nor did the director, is because they were having an affair during the first movie. And a little tidbit I learned that kind of makes the whole thing worse. Remember Snow White's mom in the beginning of Snow White and the Huntsman at the beginning? Yeah, that was his wife. So he pretty much cheated on her with her on-screen daughter. Isn't that lovely?
Oh, 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 oh.
Yeah.
Honey, honey, you need to take a step back, because what you're doing is bad.
Well, needless to say, because of this scandal, the director was not allowed to return. Kristen Stewart was originally going to, because the studios wanted to make the sequel anyway, but after passing through a bunch of directors, getting rewritten and everything, eventually she just decided to drop out. So they had to rewrite the whole thing to surround the Huntsman. So what we have here is basically a prequel, a midquel, and a sequel, like wrapped into one. And even though the Huntsman is the primary figure in the story actually is about the evil queen's sister, Freya, who we all know to become the Ice Queen. And why does she have these ice powers? Because a man that she fell in love with and had a baby with, yeah, he set their baby on fire. So, yeah, typical Game of Thrones opening right there. And because of that, she goes all crazy and she wants to rule an empire herself, where she pretty much kills all the men and kidnaps the children and raises them as her own personal army to do her bidding and to never feel love, because in her eyes she is saving them from a life of disappointment and hurt caused by love. And that is where the Huntsman comes in. So, is that a good enough summary?
I think what is initially interesting about this opening is that it very much feels like a different film. Like, the first one felt like a very cheap, like, generic medieval setting. This to me, I think Game of Thrones is a very apt representation, because instead of just putting a lot of different tropes together, instead of just cobbling things together, they really seem to establish a world here. They seem to establish how things work here. And not just visually, but the atmosphere, the tone, and everything takes a lot more risks than its predecessor. And this right here is one. I mean, it opens up with narration from Liam Neeson, which by itself is kind of interesting because he's not credited. We didn't really figure out why this happened. I think it's possibly because of the scandal that he didn't want to be associated with the film. It's possible that it was something else. I don't know. But so you have this opening narration from Liam Neeson describing what happened in Snow White and the Huntsman, actually making it sound much more epic than it was. And then we have this opening where the evil queen and Freya, the Snow Queen, have this really good heart-to-heart moment, and then her baby is murdered, and you really do feel for this character, and you can see how she was kind of tortured by this, and while you don't really get behind it, you can kind of understand why she's doing what she's doing, which is much, much more than they gave us with Snow White and the Huntsman, because you never really quite understood why she was doing what she was doing in Snow White and the Huntsman. In the first film, the evil queen just was kind of doing things to stay alive, right?
She was doing. It was more or less. It was more or less trying to keep herself alive, but also tried to, because it was part of the curse. So like she had to more so for her appearance as opposed to just keeping herself alive. I think the two kind of tie in, sort of, but it was more focused on her appearance per se.
Okay, I can agree with that, because I mean, in the first film they did a good job of setting up the character of the evil queen, but in this film they give her a little bit more humanity in the opening. But also, like, I think what they do with Freya and setting her up to be this person who wanted to love someone, and that love was robbed away from her and her child, and now she's taking other people's children to be her surrogate children and teaching them to never love lest they be betrayed. And it's a weird roundabout logic, but it's completely understandable given what she went through. And I love this opening. I love what it's setting up. And the good thing, unlike the first film, it stays consistent from the opening. Like, there are points where maybe it dips a little bit, and we'll get to it, but consistently, this tone is kept throughout the film.
I mean, I understand her motives and reasoning for wanting to raise an army of children to adulthood to, basically obey her and be her willing, army and everything. I just don't understand her execution of the whole thing. Because, she's taking kids who have already grown up with their parents, who've already been loved by their parents, and who, of course, were traumatized by having watching them died in front of them, and now being forced into this life of fighting and servitude. And she's telling them, okay, now you are not allowed to love at all. Just put that out of your mind. You're fighting from now on, but you're fighting for me, but you're not supposed to love me. You're not supposed to love anybody. So, pinky swear that you're never going to fall in love. I'm like, okay, well, you do realize that kids become teenagers, right? And hormones take over. You can't exactly stop that. Yeah, and that's what happens with the Huntsman. He grows up alongside the other children that were also kidnapped, and he ends up falling in love with one of his comrades, Sarah, who becomes his wife, and they end up starting a relationship in secret. So, yeah, kind of dropped the ball on that one, Freya. And then, of course, she punishes them for falling in love. It's like, what did you freaking expect? Honestly, I'm kind of surprised they didn't lift an element from the original Hans Christian Andersen tale, because in that one, the Snow Queen had her own magic mirror, except it was different than the Queen from Snow White. This mirror actually showed not your reflection, but it showed the evil and ugliness inside of you. And she ends up smashing it, and the fragments, whenever they get into a person's body, it corrupts their soul, so everything they see is ugly and evil. So I'm surprised she didn't do something like that with the children, place some sort of spell or whatever on them, so that way they were incapable of feeling love unless something came along that broke that spell. That was just my mindset of this whole thing. It's like, no, we're not going to place a spell or do something that makes them incapable of love. We're just going to make them swear that they won't fall in love and hope that they stick to that.
I can't understand that. There is a huge flaw in the entire execution of this plan. At the same time, I think the film does showcase this flaw quite well, in the fact that, the Huntsman does fall in love, and that, they do bang, and, this stuff happens. But it's funny you mentioned the mirror, because they actually bring the mirror back in a different way. So it turns out, that the magic mirror that the evil queen had was transported. It was taken, and, there's something evil inside of it, and Freya wants it. So it's like, all right, well, the mirror is kind of still a plot point. And I like the idea of the recurring element of this mirror, because the mirror itself was interesting in the first one. It was a visual representation of death, because the moment that the queen died, the mirror was no longer part of the picture. It had this cloaked figure of death about it. And as we see throughout the film, whenever they're chasing the mirror, there's black sludge, and death follows everyone who's surrounding this mirror. And that seemed to be kind of a prevailing thing about this mirror. It's almost kind of a visage of death, or an embodiment of death, and everyone who interacts with it tends to die around it. It's interesting, and as we'll get through the story, we'll talk more about that, but I always thought that was kind of interesting how they took the mirror, and they didn't fully adapt either version of the story of what the original mirror was, but they kind of turned it into its own character almost.
Yeah, although I'm confused as to why they're just transporting it to be stored away as opposed to destroying it. You think something that powerful, you'd want it gone.
It, although this is just a theory, it's not stated in the film, but there's a couple times where we get this kind of almost whispering voice from the mirror when people are nearby. Do you think maybe the mirror has like an influence over the people near it?
So it's like a Horcrux?
That would explain what happens later.
I think like they kind of explained it a little bit, like when we get to when they flash forward to like present day, like after a few years after the events of Snow White and the Huntsman, they a group of soldiers from Snow White's kingdom run into the Huntsman again, and they're like, "Oh, we need you because we need you to help track down the magic mirror because the mirror got stolen or whatever, was being transported away because it somehow affected like Snow White." Because there's like this brief scene where you see Snow White looking at the mirror for whatever reason. They don't show Kristen Stewart's face because she's not in it, but they you just see the back of her head, and something about her, like it affected her in some way, like I don't know, like I don't remember exactly how, but like it affected her, like it had some influence or whatever, and it was like, and she thought it was like bad or whatever, so she needed to get rid of it, and then some bandits, some was it goblins or whatever, they stole it, and now they have to go retrieve it, and like the mirror kind of almost has like kind of like that One Ring kind of feel to it, where like anybody who gets near it or possesses it gets corrupted over time or whatever, and becomes obsessed with the mirror and its power. And they were kind of tie something like that to it, so it's like it gives it a little bit more, makes it a little more ominous.
I could see that. Yeah.
I can definitely see that. Like, there are definitely still elements of Lord of the Rings in here. Like, you have this MacGuffin that they need to destroy, and you have scenes where, like, they're paddling down the river. A lot of this does feel like the Two Towers in a way, but I think they make it its own, and they focus it a lot more on what they wanted to actually do. And they actually do a little bit better with their setup if this was supposed to be their version of the Two Towers. But yeah, so it's the Huntsman teams up with two of the dwarves to track down this mirror, and along the way they meet up with Sarah, his wife, who from the first film we know to be dead, and in this film earlier on we see her killed. The interesting thing is that she wasn't killed. Freya just cast an illusion to make the Huntsman think she was killed, and they tried to dispose of the Huntsman, but they ended up not doing that. And part of me wonders if Freya did this on purpose. Like, she has this one law of, you can't love, and the penalty is death. But she seems still very, like, underneath the cold outward demeanor, she does seem like she has a soft heart, and I wonder if she made the Huntsman think that Sarah was dead on purpose to because she was too afraid to actually kill her off. And I wonder if she knew that the Huntsman would not kill one of their brethren, which is why the Huntsman is still alive. Like, there's not a lot that's actually stated, but there is subtext there to make me think that Freya was too kind-hearted to actually go through and kill them herself.
I think given how her mindset is toward men, she probably thought Eric was the one being like, the problem in all this. He was corrupting Sarah. So, she made them both see that vision where, Sarah died so that way he'd have, nothing left to live for and she can dispose of him no problem. And then made it so that Sarah saw him run away so she'd get her heart broken in the same way and realize that Freya was right all along about love being a bad thing. That way she can control her easier. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't kill off the Huntsman, because I mean they show them dumping his body in like the ocean, and somehow he survived. And only until after the events of like Snow White and the Huntsman do they actually like actively look for him. So yeah, kind of dropped the ball on that.
Yeah, that is kind of weird how his companion just said, "Oh no, it was done." It almost makes you think that he did it on purpose. But then again, that I think that's a little bit of the problem with what they were trying to do with this prequel / sequel is like they have to really set up this stuff fast. So I think if they had put in an extra scene, it would have been better. But it's not entirely necessary. It is a problem, I will admit, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment of the film itself. And I do have to state that primarily my enjoyment of this film stems from the chemistry between Chris Hemsworth as the Huntsman and Sarah. Because when they meet up, from the moment they meet up, I was instantly hooked. And you know, their chemistry as kids is great, but you know, them in modern day, like talking every single line of dialogue, like this is a very well written film, and this is something that we don't really address too much on the show, but like I paired out the dialogue and I listened to the dialogue itself, and I think this is very well written.
I agree as well, because I mean, when like realizing that Sarah was actually alive the whole time, and the way that they brought her back was actually really clever and tied into the theme of the movie real nicely. So I will definitely give it props that this movie is way better written. And as you said, Sarah is great. She was a Jessica Chastain plays her, and she is so much better. She is a much better lead than Kristen Stewart was. Which kind of makes me wonder why in the first film he was saying, "Oh, I fell in love with you because you remind me of her." In what way? They are nothing alike. Sarah is so much better.
Oh my god. Yeah, you could do so much better.
You could do better.
I also have to applaud them on their accents, because really I didn't know Chris Hemsworth could do an accent, but like they do a great job with making them feel very I couldn't quite place it. Like, it is very northern. I think he's trying to be Scottish and she's Irish, if I'm reaching correctly. I'm not entirely sure.
I want to say Irish with Jessica Chastain's accent, and I think with Chris Hemsworth, I always get confused with it. I always get confused with his accents because he always tries. Because every time I hear him, it's always like he sounds like Thor. So I don't know if he's trying to sound like Thor, or maybe kind of tone it down a bit, because
Well, he is from Australia. You can sort of catch that in his accent a bit. So I guess maybe he tries to make it sound more British, or somewhere from the New England area.
That's what I thought he was going to do. Well, try to do.
Even if I can't quite place the accent, I think it really works for the character, because like they don't actually tell where the place is from, and both of these actors do a good job of making them sound foreign without drawing attention to the fact. Like, I remember Eric. Remember when we were talking about on our old podcast, on our gaming podcast, we were talking about we were talking about this game. It was Heavy Rain, Origami Killer, about actors doing accents badly, and there's this one scene where this guy goes, Jason.
I remember that.
Jason. It's just like it's just groups of like alternate takes, and then they just put it together because you keep hitting the button again, and it's just, you could tell it's just alternate takes of just him saying Jason different ways. It's not consistent.
And like there are times where like accents like that don't work, but I think here, even though you can't quite place the accent on Chris Hemsworth, I think both of them are admirable in making you feel for the character and being believable in their foreign identity, if that makes sense.
I mean, I thought he was fine. Honestly, I gotta say, watching him in this movie was a breath of fresh air because I had already watched him in two horrible roles. Like, of course, the first one was Snow White and the Huntsman, and while he wasn't bad, I just don't think that what the character they had him play is, like the bitter old, warrior who has to drag around a princess really suit him that well because it didn't give him like the full range of his acting ability. And then the film before that was Ghostbusters, which he was absolutely awful in. Which I don't fully blame him because his character was just badly written. But yeah, seeing that and seeing Snow and the Huntsman, I'm like, is Chris Hemsworth just like a one-note guy? Is Thor the only thing he's good at? But no. No, no, this film showed that he can, in fact, act when given the right material and allowed to be his happy, pleasant self. Because that's what he's best at. He's good at being a happy character. Like, once he learns that his wife is alive and the way he just dotes on her and is, like, flirting with her and everything, it's perfect. It's adorable. Every time he smiles, it makes me smile. He's a cute little cinnamon roll, and I want to eat him all up. He's just adorable in this film.
But even more than that, he really shows his acting chops in several of these scenes. First of all, the moment he sees that she's alive, and like he doesn't skip a beat, like the surprise on his face and in his voice, like, and he's stuttering, is like, but I saw you die, like you died, and it's just like he does an amazing job with this. And there's a scene where Sarah basically comes out and she breaks down and she says, I've done some unforgivable things. Like, how can you still continue to love me? And Hemsworth is just like, maybe we're not worthy of forgiveness. That's for someone else to judge, but we are worthy of each other. And that entire scene is just brilliant, but it's really showing his acting chops because he sells every second of it, and you can feel the emotion pouring from the actor, and I just love the energy that he puts into this role. Not just in the serious things though. You're right, he has this passion and energy about him, and the witty banter that he and Sarah have between each other is just so lovable. It's so enjoyable. It's one of those things that really makes this film. It's like, I can forgive a lot of these problems simply because it's just so fun seeing these two interact throughout the entirety of this film.
Like, seriously, where was this in the first film? I would have loved to have seen that in the first film. It would have made sense as to why Snow White was awoken by him as opposed to the Duke, who was originally her love interest, who, by the way, she married in this film. Kind of awkward when you think about it. It's like, oh, I'll marry you, honey, but you're not my love, in the sense that you can wake me from a coma. Sorry. But yeah, that definitely, I love the interaction between the two leads in this. It is much needed, and again, props to the two actors for pulling it off brilliantly.
What do you think about these two lead characters, Mr. Eric?
I love the chemistry, and that was missing in the first film with Snow White and the Huntsman in the first film, was the chemistry between the two leads. And seeing this, it was like what Kat said, it was like a breath of fresh air. Seeing these two together and the way they bounce off each other, I was loving this. Like the way the two of them were interacting, and just how well they played off of each other. It was brilliant. I really like it. I also want to touch up a little bit also on some of the minor characters. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the dwarves. I know they still haven't changed. I mean, there's only 2 dwarves. Well, technically 4, but we'll get to that. But they still go back to the whole taking the actor's face and just putting them on a dwarf body. Like, why they're still doing that, I don't know. I know consistency, continuity, but still. But I think they're not as bad this time around, only because one, you don't have like 7 of them that are just thrown in there like halfway through the film, because they actually stick around throughout the entire film, because the Huntsman like meets up with the dwarves, and then they have to work together to recover the mirror. So, and then they introduce female dwarves, and they try to do like a little love thing with the male and the female dwarves together, which is like, I could leave it or take it. It's like, not really much of a side story.
Yeah, I don't understand that. Like, I don't understand why the dwarves are there in the first place, since this is the Huntsman story, not Snow White. But I mean, only one dwarf from the original came back, the one played by Nick Frost, and then they have like a brand new dwarf character who's like his half brother. But yeah, they're just there as like escorts, and then they throw in the two female dwarves, which I thought was cool because you actually don't get to see female dwarfs in movies a lot. But they're there strictly to be love interests. I mean, they show that they know how to fight and set traps and everything, but ultimately they just end up as love interests. And it was kind of disappointing, especially since, again, aside from escorting them, maybe, helping to capture the mirror and helping them to break into the Queen's Palace, they don't really do much. It's disappointing and it doesn't make sense.
They need a comedy relief, so.
I think that I'm of two opinions on this. On the one hand, I can completely agree because several portions of the film, I was wondering why they were there in the first place, other than to reference the Lord of the Rings, because like there's this canoe scene where they're going down the river, very reminiscent of the end of Fellowship, and they resemble hobbits, kind of like Fellowship, like it almost felt like they were just using them to fill that quota. But at the same time, I really love the banter between the dwarves, and I will say that the personalities of the dwarves have much improved. Like, I wouldn't say they're fully fledged characters in the same way that the main leads are, but they're fun, they're entertaining, and I felt like a lot of the interactions between the female dwarves and the male dwarves were enjoyable. If pointless, pointless but enjoyable. And it's like, on the one hand, I do see what you're saying, that they don't really need to be there, but on the other hand, I laugh at so many of their jokes when I mean, maybe I shouldn't, but like a lot of the stuff like between the abrasive female dwarf and the male dwarf that's all gruff and grumpy all the time, half the time I'm laughing out loud, which is at their banter, which is something that I don't normally do. So I don't know if it's just me or if it's just it's something that works well about their interaction together that makes me enjoy that.
I mean, I did sort of enjoy their banter a bit. Like I said, like their whole back and forth and stuff, I do like that. I just, I kind of wish they kept it at that, because they set up the Nick Frost and the other female dwarf as love interest, which, was fine, but then by the end, they have the other two get together as well, just because. It's like, they were arguing the entire film, have shown, blatant disrespect and disgust toward each other, but it's like, let's kiss anyway. Okay.
Yeah, that was weird. I think we could have done with that. I think they should have just had the joke where he leans in to kiss her, and she's like, "What? No, we're not doing this." They should have kept it at that.
Yeah.
They should have left it to that, because that would actually cemented the banter as their persona, but whatever, I guess.
Because the script said so.
Yeah, it's happy endings all around.
Because the Kool-Aid Man is red. All right, so we have two great main leads. We have good comic relief, and like there are some problems with the female dwarves and kind of the pointlessness of those characters. But I think overall we have a very solid cast, and the driving narrative of them tracking down the mirror to destroy the evil within is actually pretty good, because I didn't like The Evil Within. It's a bad game. No, no, just kidding. But I think this is a great driving narrative. I mean, they track down the mirror. It's inside a goblin den, and they track it down. They fight off some goblins, and when they get it back, the queen tracks them down. And it turns out that the entire time, Sarah was working for the queen, which is a great twist because you don't see it coming. In her initial appearance, she fights off several huntsmen to help out some of the rest of the characters. And I think that the reveal that she was actually working for the queen kind of works out great, because it seems like she didn't tell the rest of the huntsmen that Sarah was on her side. So I just think this is a really nice twist. It's kind of in league with what happened in the first film, with how that the evil queen betrayed Snow White in kind of a similar vein. But I think this is actually better done, because when we first see Sarah, she's fending off a bunch of additional huntsmen, and she doesn't give off the fact that she's with the queen, because why would she shoot an arrow into some of her fellow huntsmen if she was working for the queen? And I think it's set up very well to the point where like they pull this really good deception on the main characters, and the way it works out, you can sense that she initially was doing it because she thought she was betrayed by her husband. But over the course of the film, she slowly realizes, oh, no, he didn't betray me. And the chemistry between them really leads to the ending of the film, where he goes off and tries to rescue her. The interesting thing also about this twist is that she shoots him in the heart with an arrow. But, remember in the beginning of the film, she says, "Oh, I never miss." Well, she shoots the pendant that she gave him years ago, which is why he survives.
Good thing I always keep a Bible next to my chest.
And this piece of wood.
It's a good thing I was wearing an extra large piece of the cross today. I think I'll go inside now. Yeah, I mean, that cliché's thrown in there, and I kind of saw it coming, but, that it is cool that, she was able to hit that from where she was. I mean, that's excellent marksmanship right there. So, yeah, I kind of had an inkling that she was going to betray them, because, I could believe, of course, that, she was imprisoned all those years and she escaped for the pure purpose of kicking her husband's ass for abandoning her. But, yeah, I figured at some point, they were going to have to face him, and I'm like, oh, how's this going to tie in? Like, they have the mirror now, so, and obviously the queen is, like, observing them and hasn't made a move, so, oh, okay. All right, she has a snake in the grass there, so that's where Sarah fits in. But, it still was good, though. It was a nice twist. And it is cool that, the Huntsman manages to change her mind and, sort of like through his actions and his love gets her to betray the queen.
It's one of those things where if you pay attention, you can see it coming, because they don't make it too subtle. But I was thrown off because of, again, the interaction with the Huntsman earlier, where they have to fend off several of their former war mates, and so that's what threw me off initially. But it's one of those things where I think the execution is better than the twist itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can understand what you're saying.
But yeah, so we have this twist, and now we get into the third act. And I think what this film does better than the first is it has a nice 3-act structure. We have the opening with basically the opening, which is the prequel bits. Then you have them tracking down the mirror. Then you have the interaction with the Huntsman and Sarah. So that's the middle portion. And then the betrayal leading into the third act, where they have to go storm the castle. And this climax is so much better than the first film. It's ridiculous as all hell, but it's much better. So, first of all, two of the dwarves are frozen by Freya and taken away, along with Sarah, who goes willingly. So now we just have Chris Hemsworth and the two abrasive dwarves to storm the castle. And they go through with this crazy plan. So the dwarves pose as children to enter the castle, sneaking in. Now, this would be stupid otherwise, but they play it up for laughs, and the abrasive male dwarf is just like, I understand she may not look like a child, but she was kicked by a mule, you can just see the look on the female dwarf's face, like she's gonna punch him as soon as the cut happens. And I love this. So they sneak in, they take care of the guard, and they get ready for the ambush. Now, on the other side of the coin, Chris Hemsworth climbs the sheer side of a mountain by himself that is overlooking the castle. He runs and jumps like hundreds of feet down onto the roof of one of the buildings, and he rolls from one roof to the next roof until he uses his axe to stop himself from falling to the ground. And this is the stupidest plan ever, but what makes it is Chris breathing heavy and grabs his ribs. He's like, this is the worst plan ever. And I'm like, they lampshade it to hell, and I'm just like, they knew what they were doing, and it is ridiculous. It's over the top. I don't understand how it works, but it's just so fun that I couldn't help but I love this plan.
Chris Hemsworth would be good at CinemaSins.
There's just something about this that it's the right elements. It has all the right elements of some parts ridiculous, but some parts grounded in parody, and it knows just when to toe that line.
Yeah, I do like that there is some nice humor in it, and it's not, poop related or anything, and it's, it's based on the writing and the banter alone. Shall we get to the big reveal of the climax? The big return?
Yes.
Yes. So after this crazy plan comes to fruition, we get into the throne room where Freya is interacting with the mirror, and she says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And out of the mirror, instead of the figure of death, the evil queen from the first film pops up. And this really lends more credence to the mirror is death itself, an embodiment of death, because she states that when she died, she became linked to the mirror in a way. She's in a half state, like she's bound to the mirror. And that could mean many things, but if she did die and the mirror is an embodiment of death, that would make so much sense, where she's being channeled through the mirror. Like, she is dead, but she's being channeled through the mirror that way. And she's not entirely alive. She's cloaked in gold, like the mirror, but her dress and robes are all black. And kudos to the costuming department for this, because they did a great job with her wardrobe to make her feel elegant, but at the same time feel death-like. And so she takes control over Freya's kingdom.
Yeah, and not forcefully either. She kind of manipulates her sister the way she used to when they were younger. I kind of like that. She manipulates her the same way the mirror would sort of manipulate her. Kind of clever.
But so once again, it kind of ties back with the whole Snow White and the Huntsman trying to copy Lord of the Rings. How the Wicked Queen has has her life tied in with the mirror, kind of like how Sauron has tied his life force to the One Ring, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's almost like she drew her power from the mirror itself. And when she lost her power, she became one with the mirror. Symbolically, though, it works so well, and I love this reveal, because when we were watching it, Kat and I were both saying the same exact thing, like, wait, what? And then my jaw dropped open, and I'm like, wait, what? And then they explained, I'm like, oh my god, that's so cool, because you didn't see it coming. Like, she was dead. And so, like, this whole reveal of how she, like, comes back from the mirror, greatly done. I like that she subtly takes back the kingdom and takes over. And as soon as Chris Hemsworth is about to destroy Freya, he takes a crossbow, shoots it. The evil queen from the first film just jumps in and snatches the arrow out of midair, which is badass. And we have a final confrontation where she goes full, like, monster with these black tentacles and starts attacking all the huntsmen. And Freya tries to stop her, but she gets stabbed a whole bunch of times. And it's like this big, epic, climactic battle that really works well. And what I think works best about it, it's not this huge chosen one bullshit where the people have no training or whatsoever. Like, she's clearly stronger than the regular Huntsman soldiers, but we know that Chris and Sarah have better abilities than the rest. They already established this. And while they get thrown around a little bit, Freya is fighting as well, and it's like this big 3-person battle against this tentacle black monster beast, and I love the action, and the CG actually works. It's not intrusive. If you look closely, you can see that it's really not there, but for the most part, they keep the action flowing smoothly. It's well shot. It's not hard to follow. Like, I like this climax a lot.
I do as well, but I felt like the fight between the two queens could have been better. I mean, they could have had them showing off their powers more, attacking each other, and more of like, because when I think of like an epic like one-on-one battle in terms of magic, like I tend to think back to the one between Voldemort and Dumbledore in the fourth Harry Potter movie, because that was big, that was extravagant, that was badass. And I felt like this movie could have used some of that, because you have the one queen with her ice powers, and you have the other queen with her magic mirror, black tar, like just pure evilness oozing out of her. Like those two going head to head, this could have been like real extravagant battle. But I just felt like they made the ice queen a little too passive, a little too, like emotional to really fight properly, because she gets overwhelmed pretty quickly by the other queens. So I don't know, I would have liked to have seen more of that. But yeah, in terms of like the battle, at least this wasn't, a Lord of the Rings, let's charge the castle, like type of thing. This way we saw. We saw the huntsmen doing their thing, we saw the queens doing their thing, and it wasn't like we were seeing 4 different battles going on at once. We saw one big epic battle, so that was nice.
Yeah, it like overall, while it could have been a little bit better, I thought it was great action. This almost feels a lot more like Chronicles of Narnia than Lord of the Rings, like, because I remember when Freya came in to snatch the mirror earlier, she was riding on a giant polar bear, and I thought that was really cool, like kind of Narnia-esque. She does have kind of that design, but overall, like, this battle makes it stand out. And there are 2 things that I really want to give props to the film for. I mentioned costume design, but also like the way they slowly have the evil queen kind of descend from manipulating subtly to outright attacking, and as she's doing that, like this black ooze starts going even more and more around her and like oozing out her mouth. Like, I really love that look. I love that effect. And the other thing I want to mention is that they reveal during this fight that the evil queen from the first film, she's the one who manipulated the lover of Freya, the person that Freya was supposed to marry. She manipulated him and controlled him into destroying the child because the child was going to grow up to be fairer than the evil queen. And I'm like, that is another good twist.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, I had the feeling they were going that route, because, like, the fact that, because, you know, when the guy pretty much burns the baby alive at the beginning, I'm like, wow, this is one cold motherfucker. It's like, I mean, he couldn't easily just, you know, deny the child, or he could have had it assassinated another way. He could have even thrown it out the window. No, he fucking burns it in its crib. I'm like, wow, that is malicious right there. So I'm glad they sort of had this ending to sort of explain why it was so fucking brutal. Although I do have one question, though. Why is it the mirror said that the baby was gonna grow up to be the fairest of all, but he didn't say that about Snow White until she turned 18? Like, I don't understand that, because if Snow White was gonna eventually become fairer than the queen, you know, wouldn't that have been a set thing? Because I mean, if that was the case, the queen would have killed her right as soon as she took over her kingdom. So I don't understand what made the baby so special that she was predestined from birth.
That could have been before. This could all happen before Snow White was born. Like, this was the one that was the fairest at the time, and then when she was killed off, then it would be years later.
No, I don't mean that. I mean the fact that the mirror predicted that the baby would grow up to be the fairest, you know, from its birth, as opposed to Snow White, who, you know, she had been around for at least 18 years before the mirror said, oh yeah, she's going to be the fairest now. It's like, okay, when did that happen? What made the baby so special that, you know, it was going to be like it was going to be the special one from the get-go? Like, why did Snow White, like, why did that suddenly happen when she became of age? I don't understand that.
It's because it was Kristen Stewart, and, you know, no one can really sell that she's the fairest one of all.
But in that case, she shouldn't have been it at all. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like, at first I could understand it in the first film by itself, because it's like, okay, well, she had to be of adulthood before she can be considered the fairest, because it's kind of creepy to consider a child the fairest, you know, especially since they're still growing into their looks. But no, in this one, it's like the baby is automatically special, and it's like that pretty much gives her like a death sentence. I'm just so confused about that entire thing.
The mirror likes to fuck with people.
Clearly.
It is a plot hole, and I think a lot of it is retcons from the first film. Like, there are some things that don't quite mesh if you've seen the first film, which is why I think this film is actually better viewed separately than the first film, because it does a good job of explaining the events that happened there. And it actually makes it sound better than the film actually was. So, I don't know, like, overall, I really enjoy this film. I think this film does a great job of taking the foundation of the first film, taking the parts out that didn't work, like the brother, my brother, the overacting of the queen, because the queen is actually much better acted in this film.
Agreed.
She only has like maybe one overacting moment, but that was during the heat of the battle.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I really enjoy her overacting, but I thought overall as a character she did a better like portrayal of herself in this, cuz especially since, you know, she's like getting right down to business. She's not just, you know, not just standing in the middle of a room making random noises or saying random inflections for no reason. So, yeah, I definitely, you know, for the few scenes she had in this movie, I thought she did a good job.
Yeah, like the characters are better written. The dialogue overall is better. Like, I like the characters more. I think everything's better acted. I think this is just a better movie in general. And you may not agree that it's, you may not have the same love for this film that I do. But that's me. I have a fondness for this film where it's different from my critical analysis of the film, and that happens a lot. Like, I can take a look at Too Fast, Too Furious critically and say that it's really not the best film, but I like it so much more. And it's the same thing here, where I think critically this is good. It's not excellent, but it's good. But on a personal level, I love it. I really, really love it. And I think that's what I'm getting at with this, is that it does so much to improve, but overall, it just wins me over so much with this cast of characters, with the chemistry between the two leads, just every single thing they did with it. The fact that they didn't take itself too seriously, I really like this film. Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, I like this film as well. I'm not in love with it, but I definitely would watch this a second time. It's not like the first two films, which I never ever want to see again. This one, I wouldn't mind a second viewing. And like you said, like, it was very well acted, very well written. Like, it's a nice 3-act structure. I think had it not been associated with the first film, if it was a film in and of itself, it could have possibly been better. Like, tweak a few things, obviously use real dwarf actors instead of, photoshopping the faces on. That would be nice. But other than that, I mean, everything else was great. And like I said, like, Chris Hemsworth is like, he's a gem. He's an absolute gem. So I definitely, like, this is definitely a good role for him. And I mean, if they were to make another movie of this, which I'm not sure given on the reaction, I would be willing to see it in theaters.
Yeah, I really would like another film. They do tease something at the end. I'm not sure if that means anything, since this was a flop at the box office. But if there was a third film, I would gladly see it. Eric, what are your final thoughts of this film?
I wouldn't mind seeing it again, like everyone else. This was definitely a much better film. Like, I'm trying to think, like, they could have, like, if they did the first film kind of like what they did here with Winter's War, I think it would have been interesting, because, like, the Huntsman would have been the main focus, and then, like, have, like, him dealing with the different fantasy characters. Like, in the first film, he'd be dealing with Snow White. The second, he's dealing with the Ice Queen. And if they were to make a sequel to this, if they were to make a sequel to this one, because we saw a little thing at the end, and I think it would be Sleeping Beauty, I want to say. Because, I mean, you see another maiden in a tower, but, like, I mean, what else is there? Unless we do a real stretch and do Rapunzel, but that's, I don't know how that would work out. But I like the whole, like, with the Huntsman dealing with the different, like, fantasy characters, and how it kind of ties in with everything. It's just real. And once you have a better script and also better actors, it really does improve.
I do have a bit of a theory as to what the ending could be, because they show one of the golden birds that, came from the evil queen flying off on its own, meaning that maybe the queen did survive. And she flies to, like, a woman in a castle, like, who wears a red dress. Like, that's all they show, but, like, some have speculated that it's Snow White, and I'm wondering if maybe she may have corrupted Snow White while she was in the mirror, and maybe he's going to take over her body and take over the kingdom again. I mean, it's just a guess. I mean, we're really not given anything solid to go on, but I don't know. That'd be interesting to see what they do if they made a sequel where Snow White was suddenly evil and, like, the Huntsman has to take her down.
If that were the case, I would gladly see that, because that would actually make for an interesting film. Just don't get Kristen Stewart to play her.
Exactly.
Like That's my one caveat. But other than that, like, this film it's been so weird because I thought this would be the worst film in the franchise, especially from those trailers and just hearing everything that went on behind the scenes. But then, guys, after seeing this film, oh my god, I want a sequel. And I'm telling you right now, you should go out and watch this film. Even if you've never seen the first, go out and watch this film. It's visually impressive. I definitely think that the wardrobe, the costume designer did a great job. I love the end credits theme, Castle. I didn't recognize the singer, but like they do a great job with the presentation, but it's the characters and the writing that won me over, and I'm putting this one in my collection.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, if they showed on TV, definitely watch it, or if you're really curious, you rent it or whatever. I mean, it is worth seeing, by itself. You don't really necessarily had to have seen the first one, although I guess it gives some context to certain things. But yeah, I would go see it. It's not the best thing ever, but it won't rot your brain and it won't piss you off, unlike the other two films.
It was a much needed breath of fresh air after the last two films.
Yeah, really.
So guys, we only have one more film left in Elseworlds Month.
Only one?
And it's an animated film. We're going back to basics.
Next time, my friends, we are going to touch upon Happily Ever After, which is a direct sequel to the original Snow White, to Disney's film.
Quote,
which is a
sequel.
Quote.
Or try to be.
So yeah, this is directly related to Snow White, and it's a fitting end to our Elseworlds month. We'll see if this stacks up. We're going to have a special guest with us next time. And we're going to have a fun time talking about this interesting animated film. But until then, I am Zenith Rule.
I'm Kat McBerry.
I'm Eric Y2Staller.
And this has been a fantastic film. Just remember, guys, even if the first game in a franchise, or the first film in a franchise, or the first entry in a franchise is bad, the sequel could surprise you.
If it gets that far.
TTFN, ta-ta for now.
Hey, this is Megami33. Thank you for watching Zenith Will Review. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. If you like what you see, check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/Zenith Will Review.